Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. In this episode, you're going to learn some new details about the change in the economic priorities of the two Americas. Now, in case you haven't noticed, we used to have former President Trump in the White House, and now we have a new president, President Biden, in the White House. Well, the difference in economic priorities, the difference in budget priorities could not be more different when you compare the two administrations. For President Biden, the priority is to turbocharge investments in healthcare, turbocharge investments in social services, send out larger stimulus checks, simply do significantly more when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to education, when it comes to climate, environmental protection, green energy, you name it. President Biden wants to fund those areas aggressively. For former President Trump, on the other hand, most of these things were a lower priority relative to defense and military spending. Yes, for former President Trump, helping defense, helping our military spending increase, strengthening our defense systems was a much higher priority relative to some of the other priorities of President Biden. And President Trump made sure that the rich got tax cuts through the sweeping 2017 tax cuts that were passed into law by former President Trump. So clearly there's a big difference in the economic priorities, the financial priorities between former President Trump and President Biden. In fact, these differences are the subject of an interesting new article in the economy section of the Washington Post. You'll see this headline of an article from the Washington Post: Biden budget seeks to flip the script on Trump administration's spending priorities. The White House wants more money for all the programs that former President Trump successfully slashed or was looking to slash. Here's some interesting new comments directly from the Washington Post article. No matter how Congress recalibrates the request, Biden's initial swing stands in stark contrast to Trump's spending goals. Trump's budget proposals were often ignored by Congress, but they did serve as a marker of his priorities. He mostly sought to slash programs he alleged were examples of bloated government waste. Biden's budget frames the government in a much different light. One of the things that President Biden wants to do is he wants $103 billion in funding for the education department, which is a 41% increase over the previously enacted level for 2021. So basically, President Biden wants more funding for education. So what did former President Trump want in comparison? Well, former President Trump wanted exactly the opposite. Trump's budget proposal for 2021 sought to cut education funding by $5.6 billion or 8%. So clearly there's a big difference in priorities between the two presidents. Now let's take healthcare spending for example. Again, a big difference. President Biden's proposal will ramp up funding for the Department of Health and Human Services to $131.7 billion. Let me hear a cha-ching. So $131.7 billion for the Department of Health and Human Services. That's a 23.5% increase from the previously enacted 2021 level. In contrast, what did President Trump want? Former President Trump's proposal sought to cut the HHS, the Health and Human Services discretionary spending, by 9%. Many programs are going to be cut, and under Trump's proposal in February 2020, the budget for the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, would have been reduced by 16%. Now, when it comes to our military and our defense, former President Trump wanted more spending. The Trump years were marked by increases in spending on the military. Trump's proposed 2021 budget gave a 13% increase to the Department of Veterans Affairs. It also sought to increase overall spending on the Department of Homeland Security by 3.2% and would have increased NASA's budget by $2.7 billion, putting $700 million for lunar activities. Now, this is interesting. Now, President Biden is proposing an increase, but President Biden is proposing a 1.7% increase in funding for national defense programs, much smaller than the previous administration, and funding for DHS would stay approximately same as to where it is now at 2021 levels. So as I was creating this video, I could not help but think about Joe Manchin, the conservative Democrat from West Virginia. And the reason I bring him up is he signals the contrast that really exists not only between the Democrats and the Republicans, but also within the Democratic Party. Here's a very interesting segment featuring the one and only conservative senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, where he essentially tells us what changed his entire approach towards lawmaking, towards governing, towards bipartisanship. You have to hear it for yourself. Let's hear, in the words of Joe Manchin, what changed him, which incident changed him, and it may or may not come as a surprise to you. Let's take a look and check this out together.
Capital.
January 6th changed me, and I was very clear with everybody. I never thought in my life, I never read in history books to where our form of government had been attacked at our seat of government, which is Washington, D.C., at our capital, by our own people. Now, the British did it, but not Americans. So something told me, wait a minute, pause, hit the pause button, something's wrong. You can't have this many people split to where they want to go to war with each other.
Okay, we heard from Senator Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia. Now let's hear from the Democratic Congressman James Clyburn from South Carolina, who, by the way, with his support, President Joe Biden was able to gain the Democratic nomination and win the presidency. So I want you to know there's a very, very strong relationship between Clyburn and President Biden. This is what James Clyburn said. He said, and he's referring to Joe Manchin, that January 6th changed him. Well, it changed me as well. One Capitol Police officer talked about how many times he was called the N-word. I want to know, how does that man compromise in such a situation? In other words, what James Clyburn is saying is, well, look, Senator Manchin, you're talking about January 6th changing you. What about police officers who got called? What Congressman Clyburn said. How do they deal with this? How do they reconcile it? How do they change with it? An interesting question that poses answers, that poses more questions, and I think that each one of us need to judge for ourselves how we interpret this. Let's roll the tape and hear from Congressman Clyburn.
He said that, if I remember your interview, that January 6th changed him. Well, it changed me as well. And I want to remind him of what some of those insurrectionists were saying to those African-American law officers who were out there. One man talking about how many times he was called the N-word. I want to know, how does that man compromise in such a situation? How would he have me compromise in such a situation?
And as I was researching the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, and indeed the differences that exist in our country, I came across an incredible video from the recount. We'll provide you with a link to this video in the description section below. But in this incredible video, we understand what the founders' original vision was for the country. In fact, Joe Manchin has specifically said that in a state as small as his, West Virginia, the representation of the people is equal when it comes to the United States Senate, which is 2 senators per state. But then it got me thinking, some states have a significantly higher population than others. And the founding fathers had a vision for how states would be represented. But over time, a majority of the US population, over 50% of the population has migrated to, has found themselves or has chosen to live in a handful of states. Yes, this is true. In this incredible new video, again, courtesy of the recount, 51% of Americans who live in the most populous states, 9 states, have 18 senators representing them, because you have 9 states, 2 senators in each state, 18 senators. The remaining 49% of our fellow Americans in the remaining states across the country have 82 senators representing them. Think about this for a second. 51% of the US population is represented by 18 senators. 49% of the US population is represented by 82 senators. Some incredible statistics, best explained in this video from the recount. Let's roll the tape and check this out. I think you're going to be quite surprised. Let's watch.
After Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff's improbable runoff victories in January 2021, the US Senate became split 50-50 for the first time since 2001, and only the 4th time in history. Fittingly, it came after an election in which the presidential candidates split the states evenly as well, scooping up 25 each. But as tempting as it might be to attribute it to a divided nation, the split actually obscures a rapidly deepening disconnect between the Senate and the country it represents. Let's back up for a second. The US Senate has always been meant to be unreflective of the will of the people. Some of the writers of the Constitution directly acknowledged that. But even after senators became popularly elected in the 1900s, the Senate has become more and more anti-democratic, as population has shifted and ballooned in ways unforeseen to the designers. In the first US Census of 1790, the population of the largest state, Virginia, was 12 times that of the smallest state, Delaware. Now, that gap is more than 5 times bigger. California's population is 67 times that of Wyoming's. And even some counties and cities dwarf states. On its own, LA County would be the 8th most populous state. More people live in Brooklyn than North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming combined. 51% of the country lives in just 9 states, meaning 51% of Americans now have 18 senators, while the other 49% have 82. Which brings us to today, when both parties hold 50 seats each, despite a huge disparity in votes won and constituents represented. In total, Democrats won their 50 seats with 83 million votes. Republicans, 20 million fewer, 63 million. Those 50 Democrats represent a total of 201 million people. Republicans, 40 million fewer, 161 million. It's important to say that race is a huge part of this growing gap. Giving an outsized voice to white people was a key part of the Constitution's intent. And that lives on in the Senate's current structure. The most overrepresented citizens happen to live in the whitest states. But even the Founding Fathers didn't intend for this level of unequal distribution, because they weren't designing for it. No one was planning for a dynamic, multiracial, continent-spanning democracy back when no one knew what a cell was. So even if you're a believer in some sort of body not directly responsive to the popular vote, the modern Senate is a far cry from the one originally designed. And in many ways, that's the story of the 50-50 Senate, a flawed design to begin with that has failed to evolve with the country. Fortunately, the founders also gave us a tool to improve our system: constitutional amendments. They just have to get through the Senate first.
That's it, everyone. The incredible change in America, the incredible evolution of America. I started by talking about the economic differences, the change in economic priorities, if you will, from the old guard to the new guard. But fundamentally, we as a country have evolved, in some cases, beyond the vision of the Founding Fathers. And the United States Senate is meant to be a representation of the people, but it is at best an imperfect representation of America. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I really appreciate you. Please do me a favor. I would really appreciate it if you click the like button, if you click subscribe, if you enable notifications. That would mean a lot to me personally. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.